Hello, hi, this is Kevin Thomas and welcome to the Songwriting Sparks live webinar. Please let me know in the chat box if you can hear me. Just want to make sure I'm not muted. Just give me a yes and we will get started. We have a really exciting webinar for you tonight. I'm glad everybody could make it. We have a lot of people who signed up for this. So I also have some questions that have been asked that I'm going to answer. And just give me a second here. There is a little bit of a delay in the, good, you can hear me, sounds good. So Songwriting Sparks live webinar. This is a webinar related to the course Songwriting Sparks. And we have some people who have purchased the course and some others who haven't, but we're gonna go into a lot of information from the course because it's really an amazing course. It's gonna help everybody out. So this is hosted by, hang on a second here. It's hosted by myself, Kevin Thomas. And a little bit about me. I'm gonna switch to the video for a second so you can see me. Hi. So just wanna tell you a little bit about myself. I am a songwriter, and I've done a lot of other things in the music industry for years, but songwriting has been my passion from the very beginning. I was always really interested in the creative process. You know, I spent times in many bands as a guitarist, as a singer, you know, playing keyboard, and then teaching music. But when it came to songwriting, I was really passionate about it and very inspired. And I started writing songs as a teenager. And of course, I thought my songs were, you know, amazing until I had other people in bands critique them and tell me all the flaws in my songs. And I started to realize that, yes, when I'm inspired, everything seems amazing. And that's the case with so many people, is that when you're inspired, everything seems like it's so cool because you're caught up in that, that feeling of inspiration. And the problem is, sometimes you don't realize that your songs could be so much better if you learned a little bit of the craft of songwriting. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, the craft of songwriting. So I went on a search to find out how to really master the craft of songwriting. And I studied a lot and learned from, you know, great songwriters. I went to music college at Berklee College of Music. I went on to get a master's degree in music composition. I've recorded CDs. I've been on the radio, toured. I've done everything you could think of as a, from music producer to band leader to band manager to, putting event promoter. So I've done a lot of different things, recording engineer in the music industry, but still I keep coming back to songwriting as my main passion. And I remember when I was trying to figure out how to write really good songs, how to get better at it. There wasn't much information out there about it. Not like there is on, for instance, learning how to play guitar. There's a ton of information on that. But when it came to songwriting, there's very, very little. So I ended up discovering, Berklee College of Music. They put together a really, really good program for songwriters. It's the only school in the world that actually has a songwriting major, or, that may have changed, but up until, I think there might be one other, but pretty much they're the first one to put together a really, really great songwriting program and kind of codify the process and tell people, yes, this is something that can be taught and learned. And that's, sometimes people think songwriting, it's something you have to be born with, but it's not. That's like saying, you're either born being a good cook or you're not. Well, what about the people who learned recipes from their grandparents? Don't they become better cooks? What about the people who go to cooking school? Don't they become master chefs? So it's really the same thing with any art form. It can be taught and learned. And that's surprising to a lot of people. I still get, when I put out ads on Facebook about my company, Songwriting Planet, I still get some people saying, no, you can't teach songwriting. You either have it or you don't. And I think that's a big myth that's really hurting a lot of people and holding them back, because you can get better at any art form by learning technique. Okay, so I'm going to move back to this PowerPoint slide. And so just let me know if you can see this slide. Give me a second here to change it. And you should be seeing the PowerPoint slide now. And yes, Natalie, this is going to go on for about an hour to an hour and a half. I'm probably going to miss a lot of the things that are going on in the chat because I'm going to pay attention to the presentation. But if you have questions, I'll look over everything at the end. So the Songwriting Sparks is an online video course. It has over 42 in-depth videos about covering basically how to start songs, the best ways to start songs, because this is where a lot of people get stuck. A lot of people get stuck when it comes to starting songs and getting block, writer's block, inspiration. They have it one day and the next day you don't. So this course is designed to really help you break out of that and learn many, many ways to start songs and develop them. So it's basically how to start songs faster, better, and overcome writer's block now. So the live webinar is going to go over these points. 5 little known ways to create amazing lyrics. How to write catchier melodies that fans will sing. The 3 best ways to start brilliant new songs. How to create an infinite variety of chord progressions. 3 amazing tricks to structure songs that captivate listeners. How to never get writer's block again. Questions and answers. How to get the most out of the Songwriting Sparks video course. And a special offer at the end that you don't want to miss because it's really a big one. So you want to stay around to the end and check that out. So let's start with the 5 little known ways to create amazing lyrics. The first one, central concept. And the second one is sense-bound writing, and truncate lines, spotlight lines, and point of view. Some of these are obvious, but others are not. So I'm going to go into each of these and give you some great information that can help you with your songwriting. What is your song about? Here's a lyrics from a verse, and I'm going to read this to you. Streaming scarves, pedaling tiny bikes through golden trails of fallen leaves. Fiery hearts laughing full of life. We could feel the autumn breeze. Now that's pretty poetic. It's very colorful, a lot of images, but there's a problem. The concept is not clear at all. I mean, this could be about youth. It could be about bike riding. It could be about autumn. You really don't know. And, for one verse, you might not need to know. Maybe the second verse will get to that. But when you look at your overall song, if it kind of doesn't really sum up to something clear and concise, you want to really draw your concept into something specific, something singular. So let's rewrite this a little. Streaming scars pedaling tiny bikes through golden trails of fallen leaves, fiery hearts laughing full of life, are snatched up on a soulless winter breeze. Now here, you immediately know what the song is about. Something bad happened to the children, because everything's about children and their activities. And now the last line really sums everything up and makes it very clear what the song is about. So this is a great thing to keep in mind when you look over your lyrics. I've had so many students who come to me and say, I want to improve my song. Could you take a look at it? And I'll look at it and I'll ask, what is your song about? And they'll think and say, well, I guess I don't really know. And so if you run into that with your own songs, that's the very first thing you should do is define a central concept. And if there isn't one, create one, develop one. If it's a love song, what kind of love? Is it romantic love? Is it love of humanity? Is it love between mother and child? If it's romantic love, what kind of romantic love? Unrequited love? Is it unhealthy love where it's codependency? Is it so you see what I mean? You can get very, very specific. Lyric writing tip number 2 deals with sense-bound writing. Now there are 7 senses. Most of us think we just have 5, but there are really 7 main ones. Sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell are the obvious ones. And then the organic sense is how you feel inside your body. For instance, if your stomach hurts, or if you have butterflies in your stomach, or feel goosebumps, you know, my back aches, I feel lively today. Those are organic senses. And then the sense of motion. Remember when you're a kid maybe playing on swings and it felt so good to go up and down on the swing? That's because that's stimulating that sense of motion. So that's it's also sometimes called the kinesthetic sense. Now, if you get some of this into your lyric writing, it's one of the most important things to really make your lyrics poetic. And feel free to take notes on this, because I'm going to go over a lot of information fairly quickly here. So here's a new set of lyrics. I worked hard, but drank away my mind. In a little town, I felt so blind. The slow pace couldn't soothe my lonely heart. I had washboard abs and a six-pack mind. In a beachfront town where the sand blows blind, and tan skin would shade my dry bleached heart. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the first set of lyrics and rewriting them with more of a picturesque sense-bound writing. If we look at the first part, I worked hard but drank away my mind. In a little town, I felt so blind. The slow pace couldn't soothe my lonely heart. There's really nothing there that you can visualize, or not using any of the senses. But then if I look at the second one, I had washboard abs. Right away, you can get an image of that. And a six-pack mind, it's kind of a metaphor, but you can visualize the six-pack. In a beachfront town, that's something you can see. You can feel the wind or smell the salt air. Where the sand blows blind, you can feel that against your skin and your eyes. And tan skin, that's something you could feel and visualize. When shade my dry, bleached heart, again, that's something like an image. And in the next section, I've underlined some of these. So I took that rewrite and put it at the top. And then here would be a second verse. I was sliding down fast on a slippery slope. Those are things you can visualize and feel the sense of motion. Doing palm tree shots, well, that's something you could get an image of a palm tree and then maybe visualize some kind of organic shot drinks at a club where it has the exotic name like that. As an antidote to the missing pages, and you can feel your hands flipping through a book in my salty scribbled chart. And that's something you can taste, you can see. So this can really help you. And a really good tip is to take your lyrics, and once you're done writing them, and go through line by line and see if you can put more imagery and use more of the senses into your lyrics line by line. And it is more work, but it's really worth it. So if it takes you 10 minutes to write lyrics for a verse, it might take you a half an hour, or if you really get into it, a couple hours to rewrite them and really make them work with poetic imagery. But this is something that can take your lyrics to a much higher level really fast. It's one of the most important things. And Mark, yes, I could make these PowerPoint slides available. I didn't think of that, but I could do that, sure. Lyric tip number 3, truncating lines. So here's that same set of lyrics. Now, you'll notice that we've got at the end of the third line, heart rhymes with chart at the end of the sixth line. And so our rhyme scheme is mind, blind, heart, slope, do, chart. So it's A, A, B, C, C, B. And it's pretty balanced and works really well. But the problem with balanced sections is they close off and you feel like, okay, that's the end. What if you want this to really push ahead into another section of the song, like the chorus, for instance? So truncating lines is a great way to do that, and I'll show you what I mean. So now I had washboard abs and a six-pack mind in a beachfront town where the sand blows blind and tan skin would shade my dry bleached heart. I was sliding down fast on a slippery slope, doing palm tree shots as an antidote to my missing chart. And you feel like you're falling over, that unbalanced feeling. You get the rhyme between heart and chart, but it comes at an unexpected place, surprisingly soon, which gives you more room to start the chorus early and have a line that leads into the chorus. Maybe you can start a new line and the last word of that line could be the first beat of the chorus. And then you have what's called a back-heavy phrasing. So it's a great technique to unbalance a section. Often we look for balance so much that we forget unbalancing things can be really effective in creating motion to push the music ahead. That's truncating lines. Truncate means to make shorter. Now let's talk about spotlighting lines. I have that same section. I'm just going to go through that quickly and show you how to spotlight a line. If you extend a line, it really stands out. It's in a spotlight, and the last words stick in a person's mind. I'll just read these for you real quick. I had washboard abs and a six-pack mind in a beachfront town where the sand blows blind and tan skin would shade my dry bleached heart. I was sliding down fast on a slippery slope, doing palm tree shots as an antidote to the missing pages in my puzzle of a salty scribbled chart. By the time I get to the word chart, I mean, those last few words are really standing out. It's really in the spotlight, and you do get that rhyme. You get heart and chart rhyming, but again, in an unexpected place. It off-balances the section in a different way, in a way that extends it and really puts a highlight on those last couple words. So if you have something important to say at the end of a verse, this is a good technique to really spotlight it. And then in this case, maybe if you're going into a chorus, your chorus could come in a little later. Let's say, for instance, your verse, everything is starting on the downbeat of the measure, each line. Maybe in your chorus now, you'll start on beat 2 or 3, because if you start on the downbeat, it might be a little crowded. But that can really help to differentiate the sections so that not everything is starting on the same beat, which is a real problem and really makes things boring. Transitions like this, tricky transitions where you're off balancing things can help set up the next section so that it's not necessarily on the same beat as the first section. Okay, lyric tip number 5, point of view. Now this is something that most people know what it is, but we often forget to think about this when we are writing lyrics. Is possibly the point of view is not the ideal one for your song. So first person, that would be I, something the writer is doing. I spill my tears like bitter wine and stain a web of frozen time, forgetting that I ever had a past. Second person is you. You spill your tears like bitter wine and stain a web of frozen time, forgetting that you ever had a past. Third person. I went by too fast. Hang on a second here. Jane spills her tears like bitter wine and stains a web of frozen time, forgetting that she ever had a past. So a third person is, he, she, or somebody's name. The first person tends to be very personal and can be great when you're talking about personal experience, but it doesn't have to be about you specifically. You could be singing from the first person as a character in the song. So it's not necessarily something that you did yourself. I mean, it could be very autobiographical, but it doesn't have to be. If you're writing a story about somebody else, you could assume that the character of that person for the song, and most people will understand that you're not talking about something that happened in your life. You're just portraying a character. Third person is very, you pull the camera way back and you're looking at the world from very far away, where you can see things in the bigger picture. You can often use the third person when you want to describe many situations or many people and their interplay, all at once. Like you're looking at the scene above from the clouds, and you can philosophically narrate or analyze the situation in the larger scheme of things. Third person is great for that. A second person is like when you want to talk directly to a type of person in your audience, a certain person going through certain struggles, or a certain situation, you could speak directly to them, and it works really well. Let's talk about direct address, because this is sometimes a confusing one. Direct address is kind of like first person, but it's the singer talking to the first person. So there's two people involved. You spill your tears like bitter wine and stain a web of frozen time, forgetting I was ever in your past. So now it's like me to you. And this is a great one too. So one thing that you can do with any song before you finish it is try it in all 4 points of view and see if one of them is going to be better than the others. And I would actually do this early on, within the beginning phases of the song, so you can really pick the best point of view from the beginning rather than change it all after the fact. It's much easier. And this is a great technique though, and I've been using it more and more lately. I just recently had a song that I completely changed the whole feel of the song just by changing from first person to second person. How to write catchier melodies that fans will sing. Now, melodies are the most important part of the song. The melody is the part of the song that everybody will remember. I mean, lyrics, yes, people will remember them. Chord progressions, sometimes if they're really catchy, grooves and drum beats, sure. But the melody is the most memorable part of the song. So you want to spend a lot of time on melodies. And melodies are often the thing that we don't think of. We sometimes think a melody is just something attached to the lyrics, and we don't look at it independently. So here's a couple tips on how to write really good melodies. Practice melody writing as an exercise by itself, 10 minutes a day, just writing melodies. And I know a lot of composers who do this, who will just spend the first 10 minutes in the morning playing melodies on the piano. Because when you're writing instrumental compositions, the melody is really important. The whole entire composition will come out of some basic starting melodies that will evolve and develop throughout the piece. Use specific scales one at a time. So melodies will come from scales. You want to learn your scales on the guitar or the piano. If you're singing melodies without a reference, without guitar or piano, unless you have perfect pitch, you're probably going to sing the melody different each day. And you're going to change it around. And if you're trying to work with another singer or somebody else and teach them the melody, or a guitar player is putting chords to your melody, it's going to be impossible for them to do that if your melody is different each time. So use specific scales. If you come up with a melody in your head, go to the piano or the guitar and play the melody and figure out which scale it's coming from, what key you are in. And practice specific melodic techniques. Now, I don't have time to go into a lot of techniques in this webinar, but the Melody Madness ebook that we have on Songwriting Planet is an extensive catalog of melodic techniques. And there you can learn, I think it's over 50 melodic techniques for developing melodies in different ways. And there are 12 videos that go along with that ebook. It's really good reference. But the main thing that you want to do with melodies is start with phrasing. So for instance, I'm going to grab a guitar here. If I'm just playing I'm going on and on like that. Although there were some decent melodies in there, it just stretched out on and on like a really slow guitar solo, and nothing really memorable is there, because your melodies really need to be broken up into phrases, because the human brain understands the way we speak. It's been evolved to understand speech, where we pause in between phrases to take a breath. And that's the way our brains function and learn the best. It's hardwired into us. So if you create melodies in the same way, by breaking them up into phrases, know, like that. I'm just chopping up pieces of melody from the scale into short phrases and practicing them. Now, what this will do for you, and of course you can start adding more in the way of melodic techniques rather than just randomly going through a scale. You want to use specific techniques to develop your melodies and create melodies that are memorable without lyrics. If you can do that without lyrics, when you start creating a song with lyrics, you will have a much better sense and grasp of creating good melodies. And then play and sing your songs with just the melody to determine if your melodies are memorable. So if you take any song you've written and play just the melody, you can either sing it or play it on an instrument. Usually an instrument's better because then you can really tell what's going on with your melody, how many notes are being played. You'll be able to listen and determine, you know, is this a good melody by itself, or can it be spiced up? Can I add a leap in there maybe to make it better? Should I hold out a note longer somewhere so that the melody stands out on its own? Over time, great melodies will start coming to you as inspiration. So these are exercises, of course, but exercise is the best way to start getting that inspiration to come to you more quickly. If you're just waiting for inspiration to come to you, sometimes it comes less and less frequently the more you just wait around and don't do anything. But if you were practicing techniques, if you're working on your craft and, you know, the specific nuances of it, you will start getting inspired more and more while you're doing exercises, while you're practicing. It's a great way to turn on that inspiration. And I'm just looking at the chat box here really quick. I missed a ton of these because there's so many people on this webinar, but I'll just take a quick look. Lauren, talking about only writing lyrics and having to rely on collaboration. No, that's fine. There are many songwriters who just write lyrics. And in the old days, there used to be songwriting teams back in the, you know, the 30s and 40s where they had professional songwriters doing songwriting for musicals. It was very popular back then. It was common to have a lyricist and a composer, and they would split the job in half like that. So that's not a problem. It does help you though, the more, even if you're not going to specialize in, you know, melody writing or chords, it does help you to learn enough about the other side of it so that you can do well on, you know, on that as well. Hang on, I'm going to take another look at the chat here. Can you please elaborate on creating melodies without lyrics? Well, it's just like I was doing on the guitar. I was just creating short little phrases of melodies, and you just want to start using more techniques than I was using. For instance, what if my melodies, even with phrasing, what if they're a little boring, like? You know, it's not really moving that much. What if I put a leap in there? So there I have one leap that went up, another leap that went down. And that's a good trick, you know, putting a leap in somewhere in your melody. Another one, if your melody goes something like, what if you held out one of those notes rhythmically? Or what if you picked a different note to hold out? All of a sudden you've got completely different phrases. Another thing real quick before I move on is you do want to use repetition. So if you have phrase A and then phrase B, it's okay to repeat phrase A. So there I had phrase A, phrase B, phrase A, repeat it, and phrase C. And then you get to use repetition to help structure melodies. So that's just creating melodies on their own. Doing this will help you when you write lyrics and melodies together, will really help you to create better melodies than you normally would if you didn't practice melody on its own. The 3 best ways to start new songs. Now this is going to seem a little obvious, but I'm going to go into a little more detail about it. Lyrics, melody, or chords. Now the reason this is obvious is that this is what most people will do when they write a song. However, most of us will do it all at once. We'll try and put the lyrics, the melody, and the chords all together, or kind of go back and forth quickly and craft a song. It's a really good idea to focus on one thing at a time. Focus on just the lyrics and see if you can craft really well-written lyrics. Focus on just the melody, as I talked about a moment ago, and see if you can craft a really good melody for your lyrics. Focus on just the chords. See if you can come up with really interesting chord progressions. And spend enough time practicing each of these 3 things on their own so that when you do sit down and just write a song with these 3 concepts all at once, with these 3 components of songwriting all at once, you will have spent enough time individually on each of them so that your craft will be risen to a much higher level with each component of your song. Now in the creative songwriting video course, we go into 12 different ways to write songs. There's more ways to write songs than this. You can write songs starting with a drum beat, which is really common in hip hop music. You can write songs starting with a sound effect. So there are other ways to do it. But these are the 3 big ones, because these are usually the 3 main components of a song. And don't always start with everything at once. Learn to get good at each aspect of songwriting independently. That's the main point of this slide here. Chord progressions. How to create an infinite variety of chord progressions. Know the chords and the key. Now this is a really big one for a lot of people, especially guitar players, because it's harder to see on the guitar where the chords come from. But your chords basically come from scales. And if you know what key you're in, you'll know what chords are available in that key as your foundational chords. So for instance, in the key of C, the chords are, the C major scale is C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then C again an octave higher, and the chords will be C, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and B diminished. So if you write a song and you've got an F and a G chord in the song, the most likely, there is another key they could be coming from, but this is probably the most likely key that those 2 chords will come from. If you have 3 chords, you have F, G, and D minor, this is the only key those 3 all come from. So you know that you're in the key of C. And I have a chart for this at Songwriting Planet. You can download for free. When you get a free membership there, when you order that free ebook, you have access to a chart that goes through all the chords and all the different keys. And the reason I left it there is because this is really eye-opening to a lot of people who don't know this, that there's some kind of system behind where chords come from. This also ties in with your melody writing. If you're writing melodies and you take a moment to figure out what scale your melody is coming from, and you spend enough time learning some scales on the guitar or the piano, you can do that. And then from there you can determine what chords can go along with that melody. Chord durations. Now, if you play chords, 2 chords per measure, or 1 measure per chord, each chord lasts a whole measure, or 2 measures per chord, or even longer, you can have a chord going on for the whole song. With a lot of funk music, there's 1 chord for the whole song. But this adds variety, so you can take the same chord progression and use different pacing of the chords. It's called a harmonic rhythm, how long the chords last. So if you have a C and D minor chord, I'll just strum a couple of these for you real quick. Let's say my chord is C and D minor. And then what the next section of your song, even if you use those same two chords, I sped up the harmonic rhythm so they go back more quickly each time, and it creates interesting new sound texture. Adding another chord to it, or changing the chords, maybe you, instead of those chords for the next section, you've got an A minor and a G chord. And so there, you not only change the pacing of the chords, but you change the chords from the key as well. Then you've got a good variety. Now, just these two things alone will create an infinite variety of chord progressions. And I'm just reading something in the chat real quick. Oh, Lisa, okay, got it. She's and let me get back to this slide here. So mixing up the pacing of the chords with the chords that come from the scale, those two things on their own will give you thousands of different chord progressions. Now, in addition to that, some advanced topics, you can add notes to the chord. You can change a C chord to a C add 2 chord, to a C sus4 chord. You can modify you can add notes to a chord. You can modify the notes in the chord. You can take a C chord and turn it into a C minor chord by lowering the third, lowering a note. You can modify notes within the chord. You want to be a little careful with that because you can start getting into some pretty crazy sounding chords, which sometimes work really well in jazz music, but not necessarily so well in more popular styles. Chords from outside of the key. You can mix in chords from outside of the key. Just don't do it too much, because then it starts to sound like you're in completely different keys, and your melody may not fit the chords. So, for instance, I'm going to play some chords in the key of C and then throw in some chords from outside of the key. So here I'm playing C, E minor, F, and C. Now I've got A flat, B flat, and things like that can be used for dramatic endings, or mixing in some chords from outside of the key. There's a whole system to which chords from outside of the key are going to work best. It gets really complicated. In music college, you'll spend 2 years, 4 semesters learning about chords, and then you can go on and take advanced classes in different types of harmony as well. So there's a lot to it, but I try and keep things simple. And you will have to spend a lot of time really studying music theory to understand chords in depth. But if you just know the general ways to manipulate them and use them, it'll take you a long way without having to spend years of studying music theory. So with the courses at Songwriting Planet, I try and keep it simple enough that anybody who does not know how to read or write music notation, that does not know music theory, can understand and use these concepts. David, is this for general songwriting or for a genre? No, this is for general songwriting within any genre. There are some styles that will use a different scale. I'm talking about major scales here. If you play the blues, you're coming from often a blues scale, and chords are slightly different. But in general, everything is how the chords and the scales relate to each other. And the questions that I'm not answering here on the chat, because they're going by quickly and I don't have time to hit them all, I'll try and get to them at the end. And I'll look through here, and maybe I'll even email you if I missed you. 3 amazing tricks to structure songs that captivate listeners. Change the starting beat of melodies in different sections. I talked about this earlier in the lyrics section, where if your melody is starting on the first beat of the measure for every section, it's going to kill your melody. What if you had a verse, a pre-chorus, and a chorus, and your melody in the verse starts maybe on beat 2 of the first measure, and your melody in the pre-chorus maybe starts a little bit before the beat and comes into it for each line of the melody in that section, and then the melody in your chorus comes in right on the downbeat. You know, those are 3 great ways to change up the pacing of your melodies and structure your songs in a way that all of a sudden turns something kind of boring into something interesting, just by moving the starting point of your melodies to different places, so they're not all coming in on that same beat for every section of your song. Use an odd number of lines to off-balance sections. Now, this is something that I know for me, I almost never thought about this until I saw it in some songs and how it worked really well. Most of the time, we're looking for balanced sections when we write lyrics. But what if you have a 5-line verse instead of a 4-line verse, you know, or a 7-line verse? Something like that can create an off-balanced feel that'll push the song ahead into the next section and create motion. Sometimes when we have very balanced sections of even number of measures, even number of lines, it stops the motion. So throwing in things that off-balance your song usually at the end of a section will push it ahead into the next section. And sometimes this will happen, you know, as a result, but you could also do this independently. You can add or take away measures to off-balance sections. So you probably all heard at the end of a verse that extra measure with the big drum fill to lead into the chorus. You know, that's one way to do this, adding an extra measure to off-balance a section. But pre-choruses, this works great for pre-choruses, where if you have an 8-measure verse and an 8-measure chorus, maybe you can create a 5-measure pre-chorus. And that uneven musical phrase, musical timing will kind of spill you over into the next section and create a push ahead. So these are really great techniques for doing that type of thing. And these are the type of things that, you know, when we get inspired and are writing purely from inspiration, we can come up with some really good things. But then sometimes we don't know what to do with it next. And we just say, well, I guess it's done. You know, that was my inspiration, that's it. But if you have some of these techniques in your toolbox, you can go through your song and say, hey, why don't I try that off-balancing technique where I can, you know, maybe make this pre-chorus a little more energetic by having an odd number of measures to push it into the chorus and create energy. But if we don't know techniques, if you don't know any techniques and have the tools, it's hard to really take your song to the next level. You're just kind of stuck with whatever inspiration came to you at the moment, and you can't develop it or improve upon it. How to never get writer's block again. Now, this is a big one, and this is one of the reasons Songwriting Sparks was created, to help you overcome this. And this ties into what I was just mentioning. Practicing songwriting techniques, like some of the ones we've gone over so far, as exercises is a great way to snap you immediately out of writer's block, because inspiration is more likely to come when you are writing than when you are not. And that sounds funny to a lot of people because they think, well, I can't write, I'm just not inspired. Maybe I'll just wait for tomorrow, I'll feel inspired. But if you start writing, you know, with exercises or with some kind of routine to work on your craft, inspiration is more likely to come when you are doing that than if you're just waiting for God to send you your next song. So don't passively wait for your next hit song. Work on your songwriting craft now, and inspiration will come more likely and quicker. And I'm going to take another quick look at the chat box here. Okay, Lisa mentioned about Taylor Swift, who doesn't read music or you know music theory, and how does she come up with complicated chord progressions and melodies without studying theory? People who are that famous have producers, really well-established, musically educated producers who help them. And in the Songwriting Sparks video that gives an intro to the course, I talk about this a lot, where, you know, one of the biggest names in history in music, the Beatles, came up with amazing songs, and they didn't go to college for music. Where did they learn how to do that? Well, if you compare their early material with their later stuff after they started working with their producer, George Martin, it's like night and day. Their earlier stuff sounded like basic rock and roll from the 50s. And their music, after they started working with the producer who had a college degree in music, who had what was a composer and an arranger and had all that education, he helped them to weave their songs into something much more better. And in the process, they learned the techniques and the theory and the craft of songwriting from working with, you know, a great producer. And somebody like Taylor Swift, you know, she's got access to some of the best people in the world. And a record company and publishing company, you know, they're not going to release an album or put money into it unless it's really, they feel it's really a hit, you know, has hit songs. And so producers will go in there and help a songwriter take it to the next level commonly. And it's great to have that access to that type of help. So to shortcut years of trial and error, learn the techniques of the great songwriters, composers, lyricists, poets, and producers. When I went in and recorded my second CD, I had a really good producer who almost said nothing about my songwriting, because by that time I had learned so much. I was coming in there with completely well-written songs that really there were no flaws in it that needed to be corrected before we recorded it. Whereas most of the time, I think when my first CD, the producer spent a lot of time with me, helping me rewrite things and changing things, because it needed it. I was new at it, and it helped. And in the process, I learned a lot. So learning while you're recording, you know, getting a really good producer is helpful. Learning while you're recording, learning from other songwriters by studying their songs and analyzing it. Of course, you know, going to college for music is great too. If you find a school that actually has a songwriting program, like Berkeley does, you know, studying the composers, the great lyricists, just reading lyrics and looking at the techniques being used. What's the rhyme scheme of the lyrics? What's the rhythmic pacing of the words? How many syllables? Just taking a look at a lyricist, getting a book of lyrics or from somebody that you really admire, one of the great lyricists or poets. Poetry is a little stiffer sometimes. I mean, it depends on what type of poetry you're talking about, but traditional poetry was very structured, but you can still learn a lot from it. You know, lyric writing tends to be a little more freeform in terms of taking liberties and putting different rhythms into your lines. Whereas with traditional poetry, you know, you had to write with, the game was writing with a certain rhythmic setup for each line, and a certain rhyme scheme for each line, and sticking to that for the whole poem. Questions and answers. Dan had a question that he emailed to me. Let's say I've come up with the initial lyrics and melody to a new song. So I've got this framework of a tune I can sing out loud or hear in my head, but how do I know which chords would be the correct ones for playing the tune on guitar or any other instrument? Well, that's a really great question, and that's very confusing for a lot of people. So if you have lyrics and a melody, the best thing to do first is play your melody on the piano or the guitar and figure out what scale the melody is coming from. In doing this, you may end up modifying a couple notes of the melody just so that it does fit a scale and is not going all over the place and jumping around to different keys. But often if you hear a melody in your head, it's usually from, you know, having grown up in a culture that plays music that comes from scales, you'll almost always naturally start singing something that fits right into a scale. Now, once you figure out what scale you're coming from, you can look at the chart we have at Songwriting Planet, and you can download it for free, and you can figure out what chords go along with that scale. And then use the 7 basic chords from the key as chords that you can play with your melody. Now, from one section of the melody to the next, one chord might work better than the next, but having 7 chords rather than an infinite number of chords that you don't know which one to start with is much, much better as a starting point. Even though, you know, the first chord you use might not be the right one, maybe the second one will, or the third, but it narrows it down a lot. So I would do that as a starting point. And again, this comes back to songwriters who write melodies. You've got to learn your scales. You should learn your scales on the piano or the guitar. Just the basic 12 major scales will take you a long way, because the most common scale that we use in popular music of all styles in our culture are going to be your major scale, your minor scale, which is actually a variation of the major scale. It's the major scale starting from and ending on a different note. And then your major and minor pentatonic scales, which are like skeleton versions of those two. And then your major and minor blues scales, which are like pentatonic scales with blues notes added. Those are the 6 most commonly used scales, and they all can be seen as variations of your major scale. So if you just start with learning your major scales on the guitar or the piano, it'll take you a long way in learning how to define your melody in relation to the scale and then figure out what chords go along with it. So I hope that helps answer the question, Dan. And we have a question from Mari. One, how do you get a song? How do I get a song I've written in front of the right people? Which kind of relates a little bit to point number 2. How can I get market information on what goes right now? Well, those are both music business related questions. And we do have a new page on Songwriting Planet that talks about music business. And right now we just have one live webinar there, but there's going to be more information added really soon, actually. But the live webinar has 2 really great people who teach the music business. I have Rick Barker, who was Taylor Swift's first manager, who helped her rise to fame, and Dave Cusack, who was the founder of the entire Berklee College of Music online program with over 130 classes. As of this webinar, there's probably going to be more added each year. But these are 2 really big names. They both have put together programs that can help you learn everything there is to know about the music business. There's a lot to it, and it can be a big study, so it's more than I can cover right now in this webinar. But start there. Just check out their webinar, and that'll get you started. Now, your third point, should I continue writing from the heart, soul, imagination, as I already do have songs recorded? Yes, you absolutely should. Everybody should write from the heart, soul, and imagination. Although I teach songwriting technique and craft, I take it for granted that everybody who is here, everybody who's interested in songwriting, has that inspiration inside, and they tap into their heart, soul, and imagination, whenever they sit down to write. When you don't, think about when you get stuck and have trouble doing that, think about what I said earlier about, when you're practicing writing as a craft, inspiration will come to you more readily than when you're just waiting for it. But yes, you should always write from the heart, soul, and imagination. But learning your techniques will help you tremendously to take all that stuff to a higher level, to take everything you come up with through inspiration to a much higher level. At first, it could seem, learning new techniques could seem a little analytical and will slow you down temporarily until it becomes second nature. So keep that in mind whenever you're learning something new. Whenever you're learning a new technique, you're going to have to stop and think about it, and that's going to temporarily block your creativity. But you think about it, you practice it, you utilize it, and then it becomes part of you, second nature. You don't have to think about it anymore, and it starts naturally coming out in your writing. You start utilizing a tool and a technique naturally that you didn't have in your tool belt before. And you do this with enough different techniques, you develop a really cool craft of songwriting. Think about the 2 girls in grade school studying gymnastics. One is naturally doing handstands and cartwheels and doing pretty good with floor routines all on her own. You know, she's just having fun and doing it all from the heart. The other one is flopping on the ground and uncoordinated and can't really do well. Well, the second girl takes songwriting classes and has a coach for a year. Says, no, hold your hands this way. No, stand up that way. And goes through every little technique of the craft of gymnastics floor routines with her until she learns them and they become so second nature that a year later, she's doing all kinds of artistic handsprings and you know, floor routines that are very complicated, while the other girl, who was originally just doing things from her own heart and imagination, is very limited in the long run by not having studied technique. So that's the type of thing technique can do for any craft, whether it be songwriting or cooking or painting or you know, architecture. Here's another question from Gary. I wonder if it's better to write melody and lyrics separately or together, or is it more of a personal preference? One of my songwriting friends can always sing out lyrics with great melody, but I can't really do that. Well, it's good to write and practice melodies and lyrics separately so that you get good at both independently. Now, if you have a preference for one over the other, it's fine to just be a lyricist or just be somebody who writes melodies and chords. And as I mentioned earlier, with the old school style of professional songwriters, there would always be songwriting teams, and one would be a lyricist and the other be a composer. And they kept it very separate like that because it does utilize different parts of the brain when you're writing lyrics and then when you're writing melodies. And I find myself, you know, sometimes I'll write a song and I'll start writing everything at once, but then I'll really have to focus on one or the other, either the melody or the lyrics, in one sitting to take that to a more developed level. So maybe one day I'll work on the lyrics, and then the next day I'll say, well, let me check how the melody is doing and make sure that's working well too. And after doing that, if I change too many things, I may have to edit the lyrics to fit the new melodies. But another thing, Gary, that can help you is if you're having trouble singing melodies, usually the most common reason is that you don't have basic vocal technique. And a couple singing lessons from a good qualified voice teacher who has a college degree in music will take you a long way. I always recommend that. You know, I've seen with my own voice students that sometimes 2 or 3 lessons can completely change everything they're doing, just learning some basic technique. And then you may find that you sing melodies much more easily, much better after doing that. So I would recommend that. And your second question, does natural talent play a role in songwriting? It appears to me some people with similar musical backgrounds and amount of practice have different ability. Well, yes, everybody has different abilities, and some people are naturally better at some things than others. But as I mentioned with the gymnastics example, you know, you have one girl who's naturally good and another who's not. The one who's not trains herself, gets a coach, has training, and she comes out being much, much better in the long run. So you can develop yourself into anything you want to be. If you don't feel you have natural talent at something, but you really want to do it, that passion will take you a long way in finding the tools you need to get better. You don't need natural talent. And talent is way overrated. You know, we hear, you know, to put it bluntly, you're being lied to by the music industry. The music industry marketing departments will make everybody sound like they're given gifts from God that are so much better than the average person could ever have that you should really buy their albums, buy their music, because they're given music from God and you are not. And it's just not true. The truth is, you know, sometimes people get signed with record deals, not because they're great songwriters, but because they're popular and they have all their high school friends come out to their shows and they create such a big following because of their personalities or because of you know, some other aspect that has nothing to do with their writing ability, that they get a record deal. And at that point, their songs need to be completely worked on and developed by a producer to make them good enough to become something that the record company could release that people would want to hear on the radio in a large scale. I remember I worked with a producer in Los Angeles I was doing some recordings up there, and he happened to know Gwen Stefani from No Doubt, and he knew the president of that record company, and he told me a story. He said that that they were stuck with a record deal for 3 years before they would release an album, and he asked the record company president, why did you do that? Why did you hold them back like that, or something to that effect? And he said, well, they just didn't have a hit song. Their songs weren't good enough, and I knew that she was a star. Like what she had going for her was a type of charisma that at least that record company president felt that she had the type of charisma where she could be a great performer. But they weren't at the time good enough songwriters for a big record deal. So they had to wait a few years until the songs got good enough. How to get the most out of the Songwriting Sparks video course. Let me pop up this poll real quick. So I really want to check with you guys. This one I'm just asking, what level would you consider yourself as a songwriter? Beginner, intermediate, or advanced? Just so I know generally, what type of crowd we have here, and I'll share the results with all you guys. So if you want to go ahead and click on one of those, that'd be great. Okay, so how to get the most out of the Songwriting Sparks video course, for those of you who already have it or are considering purchasing it. Set up a practice routine for the songwriting techniques that you learn. Practice with the same type of routine as you would have while taking guitar or piano lessons. So this is something most songwriters just never consider, that you can actually practice songwriting and get better at it. So setting up a routine, like if you were taking guitar lessons, usually your teacher gives you things to work on, and then the next week you come for another lesson, he asks to review what you worked on to see if you practiced it and got better at it. Well, if you do the same thing for yourself with the techniques that you're learning about songwriting, setting up a practice routine, modifying it week by week, it will help you tremendously in the Songwriting Sparks video course and with songwriting in general. Just keeping a list of different techniques and making sure that you practice them. Also, you can consider songwriting lessons. Take your songwriting to a magnificent level as fast as possible with songwriting lessons. I teach songwriting lessons on Skype. You may be able to find somebody in your area who teaches them in person, but I've found it's really tricky finding somebody who actually teaches songwriting in different cities. You'll find a ton of guitar teachers and piano teachers on Craigslist, but singing teachers as well. But it's really tricky trying to find somebody who actually teaches songwriting, which is why I started Songwriting Planet, because I was looking for more ways to get better at songwriting when I started out, and there was very little information out there. There were a lot of books on lyric writing, and a lot of them were pretty vague. They weren't very, technique driven, but there was very little about the actual music of songwriting. And still to this day, there's just really not that much information. But yeah, consider songwriting lessons. It can help you a lot. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Songwriting Sparks video course now. And if you already have this course, that you don't have to pay too much attention to the next couple slides. It's going out to people who don't have it yet. But before I do that, let me check this poll real quick. Okay, the poll results. We've got 31% are beginner songwriters, 60% are intermediate, 9%, if I'm reading that right, are advanced. Great. Good. So I hope for you advanced guys that I covered enough new things that you didn't think of at first to make this worthwhile. And I hope for the beginner songwriters that it wasn't too technical. I'm trying to strike a balance because there's such a wide range on this webinar. Let me just check the chat box real quick. And again, I apologize for missing so many of your questions. I'll look at these at the end. It's just there's so much material that I wanted to give you to cover here. So I'll make sure I get to these at the end, and I might have to email some of you guys with your answers. But let me talk for a second about the Songwriting Sparks video course, because that's where all this information is coming from. The course covers everything I've talked about plus much, much more in a very in-depth, step-by-step manner. I went through some concepts and techniques really quickly here, but the Songwriting Sparks online video course is designed to help you really learn at a much more involved pace that takes you step-by-step, very systematically through many, many more techniques to help improve your songwriting. What is the cost? What is the value? What was originally valued at $1,997 by advisors, which I thought was way high, but they told me that it's really the first and only songwriting course by someone who has had most advanced training. I mean, I don't like to talk about myself too much, but I did graduate from Musicians Institute. I graduated from Berklee College of Music with honors. I have a master's degree in music composition. Those are all really world-renowned universities and schools. And the real-world experience, I've done recording, radio airplay, performing, touring, etc., and a lot of other things. And they told me, I'm really the only person who's put together something who has this type of background, who's put together a video course like this. And Berklee College of Music, compared to their courses, they have a great program, by the way, and I don't want to say anything bad about it at all. I learned a lot from Berklee. But their courses are $1,400 for their new online courses. The cool thing about it, though, they do allow people in without I believe, without an audition process. If you want to get into their main college, you have to go through auditions. But the new online program, I believe, don't have that. But again, the price is pretty high for just one course. So you're not going to pay that much, at Songwriting Planet. You're not going to pay $19.97 or even $1,400 like Berklee charges. First, I said, let me discount it down 75%, something everybody could afford, to $499. But then I thought, the struggle. I remember trying to develop myself as a musician. I really couldn't work a full-time job and work on my craft of music to the degree I wanted to. I had to stick with part-time jobs so that I could have enough time to practice and develop myself and develop bands and do the marketing for bands. And so I didn't make a lot of money. So I thought about this, and I thought most people who are interested in songwriting probably feel the same way. You're interested in art, in songwriting, and that's a passion. And so maybe you're not making as much money as somebody who's interested in accounting or, financial management or topics like that. So I said, let me drop it down even further. So now it's a one-time fee of $197 or $69 a month for 3 months. So I have a payment plan also. But for this webinar only, I wanted to give a special offer. That's what I had said at the beginning. So tonight only, if you want to get the course, there's a 50% discount from the discounted price. So it's only $97, less than $100. You can have the entire course with over 42 step-by-step videos that you can access online. And that's not all. There are 2 bonus courses that you get for free. Piano chord mastery for songwriters, the 12 essential piano skills for songwriters. This will go a lot into learning your chords. For guitar players, guitar chord mastery for songwriters. These are 2 completely separate courses. The Guitar Chord Mastery for Songwriters course, the essential skills for songwriters to master the guitar fretboard. So these bonuses won't last. I'm going to be selling these independently. And so if you're interested in learning more, grab these while you can, while they're still available as part of the Songwriting Sparks course. Each bonus course was valued at $200, so it's a total of $400 value that you get free, absolutely free, today, just for signing up for the course. And why am I giving these away? I mean, people told me I'm going to lose my business by giving away so much for free. And so I'm not going to be able to do this for a long time, because it does take a lot of time. You know, I'm a music teacher. This is what I do for a living. I teach music. I teach songwriting. Right now, I'm just doing it online so I can help more people than, you know, private students coming to my house like I've done for years. And so why am I giving all this stuff away? Well, I want you to have everything, you know, all the skills that you need to succeed, because I really care about you succeeding. I know if you're a songwriter, you're going to need some piano or guitar skills as well. So this will help you with that. But I can't keep these prices so low and give this stuff away forever for courses that take me months and months of full-time work to create. You know, Songwriting Sparks took a year to put together. But I want to offer these to you tonight. So grab your discount for Songwriting Sparks now at www.songwritingplanet.com/sparks. And I'm going to put up the link here, if I can find where to do it. Just give me a second, so that you can, here we go. There we go. So that link should have popped up for you. So it's a direct link to the course. So just a little closing note here on the PowerPoint. I sincerely hope you benefited from the training tonight. You know, I really care about you guys. I want to help people get better. And my goal is to help you become the absolute best songwriter you can be. Please send me your feedback, comments, and questions about the live webinar to, you know, me, Kevin Thomas, at info@songwritingplanet.com. If you're watching a replay, be sure to leave a comment below. And thank you for sharing the journey. And here's the closing slide. So we ended a little earlier than I thought. So what I'm going to do is take a quick look at the chat to see if I can answer a question or two. Denise says, I'm melody driven, lyrics are harder. Well, you know, everybody has a natural talent at one thing, and other things you may need to work on. I was actually the other way around. Lyrics came easy to me and melody was harder. So I worked a lot on melody, and now I'm pretty good at it. So you can develop yourself no matter where you start. Wow, so you guys are having a lot of conversations between you on the chat. That's great. That's great. I wanted to, you know, sometimes I close the chat off and make it private because it can be distracting for people, but I wanted to leave it open. There's so many people on the webinar, and it gives you a chance to connect. So I'm glad you're able to do that. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of comments, not a lot of questions. I often start with the root chord and stay on until the melody no longer matches. Then I choose one of the family chords in the key. That's a great idea, David. Yeah, start with the root chord. Well, I would also say, if you know what chords are in your key and you often start with the root chord, like if you're in the key of C and you often start with a C chord, maybe trying starting with one of the other chords in the key on a regular basis, picking a different one each time, can help you break out of that and come up with new creative ways to write. I'm going to move to the top of the chat because they're going by so fast and you guys are still chatting. Roger asks, please explain how and when to use a key change in a song. That's a great question. Key changes are not that common, but a really common place to use it is towards the end of a song. You'll hear a double chorus, often at the end of the song. And sometimes the second chorus, there'll be a key change up a whole step. If you're in the key of C, it'll go up to D. But it's so common, it's almost become cliche. And sometimes both choruses at the end will do that. So you'll hear key changes there often. Hearing a key change from chorus to verse happens once in a while. A key change within a section is, I can't think of any examples of it. Well, no, I take that back. There are a couple, but it's really, really rare. Often the best place is either towards the end of the song or from section to section. At whole step, key changes are common, but they're a little bit cliche these days because they've been used so much to add energy at the end of a song, whereas you could use some other technique to add energy besides raising the key up a whole step. You could do something a little more interesting. But key changes, that's an advanced topic and it can get very complicated. I've experimented a lot with key changes, trying to come up with different ways to do it. And it gets a little tricky, but it's fun. It's a lot of fun. Asking about the offer, when will it expire? Yes, I'll leave it up. I know I said tonight only, but I'll leave it up for a couple days. I'll make sure I do that so that you guys can get it tomorrow or the next day. I'll probably leave it up till Wednesday. Larry wants to know about the web page tab. Is the chart located under it? The web page, it's when you go to songwritingplanet.com, you can get a free ebook. There's a login form for that. When you sign up for that free ebook, you get an email that gives you access to the back office where you log in to Songwriting Planet and you have some videos you can watch for free, and also that chord chart is there. Strawberry Fields Forever, yes. I was actually thinking of, Rod, that's a great example. I was actually thinking of a couple Beatles songs when I thought about key changes. They're later stuff. They're more experimental music towards the 1967 and later. They experimented with a lot of key changes and came up with really great stuff. I've studied that to get ideas. Denise talks about Writing Better Lyrics by Pat Pattison. It's a great book. Pat was one of my professors at Berkeley, and I always recommend his books. On Songwriting Planet, there is, and on our YouTube channel, there's an interview that I do with Pat. I interviewed him when he came to town here in San Diego, and it's a half-an-hour long interview. You might want to check it out. It's really good. He always has really brilliant things to say. Somebody said to me the other day that songwriting isn't like writing poetry. Are there not different styles of writing? There are different styles of writing poetry. You know, I mentioned a little bit about this earlier. Traditional poetry tended to be very structured. Later, you know, in the last century or so, there's a lot more free-form poetry. So the free-form poetry can be a little bit closer to lyric writing, but sometimes it gets so free-form that it's not structured enough even for lyrics. So, but they do go hand in hand. You can learn a lot from studying poetry, and you can set poems to songs. and asking about writer's block at the moment. How do I overcome it? Practice the songwriting techniques that you learned tonight. You know, if you made notes and wrote them down, practice them as exercises. And doing that on a regular basis is almost guaranteed over time to snap you out of writer's block. Zoe has a fear about writing a melody that already exists. That's a valid concern. I mean, it's sometimes hard these days to write melodies that are fresh and new because there's been so many melodies that have been written. Even George Harrison got sued for his song My Sweet Lord, which was a melody really similar to, I think it was a 1950s hit song, and he lost. And I don't think he stole the song, but he might not have even heard the song. It might just have came out similar. But often we hear songs and then we start writing melodies and don't realize we've been so influenced by certain melodies we've heard in the past that they're going to come out almost exactly the same. You can change so many other things, though. If you have a melody that sounds just like somebody else's melody, just changing the tempo of the song and a couple chords can often make it sound so different that it's no longer the same melody. Another way to break out of it is take your melody. If you realize it sounds similar to another song, change one note in the melody to make it just a little bit different. Either change the pitch or make that note a little bit longer or shorter. And all of a sudden you've got a new melody. Fabian wants to know, can I critique your songs? I can do a quick critique of your song if you send it to me. I don't have time to do, hundreds of song critiques. What I like to do is do really extensive, in-depth song critiques where I can help you take your song to another level in the songwriting lessons that I teach. So if you're really interested in a thorough song critique, I suggest looking into the songwriting lessons at Songwriting Planet, and I can help you over Skype in a more in-depth fashion. And David asked the same question, what about song critique? So yes, I mean, send me something. I can give you some quick feedback, but I just can't spend hours of time doing free song critiques because I have so much going on with keeping the business of Songwriting Planet together, keeping material developed for it, so I can keep offering you free material, and also my own music. Are there professional song translators to help place songs in other cultures? Roger, what culture are you thinking of? And again, I apologize that I've missed a lot of questions here because there's just so many people on this webinar tonight. So if I didn't answer yours, I'll look through these at the end. So Roger and Fabian talking about changing, translating songs to other cultures. There's not necessarily song translators, but you can find a general translator and ask them to translate the song into another language. You can find those on Fiverr.com or Odesk.com. Those are two great outsourcing sites and can be pretty cheap. However, you have to think about accents with syllables. When you misaccent words in another culture, it's harder to know that you're doing that, especially if you don't speak the language. For instance, if I say the word actually, it's got 4 syllables. The first and the third are stressed, actually. If I say it reversing the stress pattern, actually, it sounds, like you can't even understand what word I'm saying. So you have to be careful of stuff like that when you're placing accent and stress syllables on places where you shouldn't, or what's more of a problem is when you place syllables that should be not accented and putting them on strong downbeats. That will sound very, very strange. So knowing the language you're translating into at least to some degree, is going to help you a lot, making sure that your melody that's been translated by a translator is going to be set well. You know, I'm sorry, making sure your lyrics that have been translated by a translator is going to be set well to a melody. Japan, yeah. So that's a very different language from English too. So you're going to want to, you know, you might want to not only get a translator, but, you know, get it translated first and then hire somebody who is a producer in Japan and just ask them, could you look at my melody with the new lyrics and tell me if this is set well, if there's any mistakes with the accenting. Okay, I'm going to look at some more questions here. David says, I heard you can use the suspended fifth chord of the key you're going to. If you're talking about, I'm not sure if you're talking about key changes, but yeah, you can, the most closely related keys, if you were in the key of C, going to the key of G, it's the fifth chord, and making a key change to that key. It's the most closely related key, that and the fourth, which will be F. So if you're in the key of C, and if you go to either the key of G or the key of F, they're very closely related because there's only one note difference in the melody. So that's even more closely related keys than a whole step. It can be a very subtle key change too. It's almost sometimes imperceivable that the key has changed, unless your melody really hits that one different note strongly. Okay, David said yes, it is key change. So I hope that helps. You know, that the key of the fourth and the fifth are the most closely related keys, because the key of C has no sharps or flats. The key of F, which is the fourth, has a B flat in it. And the key of G, which is the fifth, has an F sharp in it. So there's just one note difference in the melody. Whereas if you go a whole step up from the key of C to the key of D, that's got two different notes in the melody. It's got an F sharp and a C sharp. So a whole step would be the next further in terms of more extreme key changes. And then if you go a third away, you know, it's even further away. Oddly enough, the most extreme key change is a half step up from C to C sharp, for instance, where you'd think it's so close, it should be like the most closely related key, but it's not, because your melody all of a sudden has all 7 notes completely different. Okay, guys and girls, I'm going to have to close out the chat box now, but I really want to thank you again for showing up. It was great discussing this with you. I'm glad you all got to have some conversations here, and I will save this this chat box, if I can remember how to do it, so that if there's anything pressing, that I can maybe find you guys and email you, and feel free to email me with any really burning questions. So I'll just give it a second or two. For you guys to close out your conversations, and if anybody's still exchanging email addresses. Ernest, with the chord chart, if you just send me an email and I'll direct you to it. info@songwritingplanet.com. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Scott. Okay, guys, so I'm going to close off now. Have a great night, and I hope you had a good time. Okay, bye-bye.